Hello, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm going to spend some time talking about what I learned in this project and a little less time narrating what I do. Besides the Riker maneuver. Have you ever stopped doing a project because you don't know how to proceed? Or because you're haunted by its very existence? For days on end, you're obsessing over what tools to use to fix that. But you don't actually ever try to fix it. Maybe your companion comes and gives you love and attention because they know you're stressed over a late or silly crafting project. Maybe it's the concept of being late in something that you initially started doing as a hobby. I started this project as a challenge that Boylei Hobby Time is doing. This piece is going to be my submission for the theme Otherworldly Landscapes. Naturally, I went with crystals, because there's definitely not any of those where we live. For those Elden Ring fans out there, I was going for a Caelid meets the crystals from Liurnia of the Lakes look. Anyways, the project was going really well, and then I made a tree, and honestly, it wasn't even about the tree that caused the pause in momentum. It was more so just things that were happening in my life that were manifesting themselves into my work and my art, like people that were close to me moving on to bigger and better things. I know that sounds weird, but if you're already feeling a little self-conscious of, I don't know, your trajectory in your career or your art, or even your relationships in your life, for me at least, all of a sudden that starts popping up in other parts of my life. Subconsciously, usually, at first. So I was feeling like a desire to not craft because maybe I'm behind in my career field or my academic pursuits. But blaming it on that tree was very effective because I was avoiding it like the plague. I would wake up in the morning and the first thing I thought of was this tree. And the tree isn't even that bad, it's just really big and bulky and doesn't fit the scale of the project I was doing, but I still managed to blame it all on the tree for at least a week and a half, instead of looking at the overarching problem of why I felt the way I did. Whether that was valid or relevant or even fair to myself. Oh yeah, be sure to be in a ventilated space when you're using a butane torch on foam. It's really toxic. But one of those aforementioned people that are moving on to bigger and better things that will be less involved in my life from here on out was a boss of mine who really showed me what good leadership looks like in a healthy workspace. And they also kind of integrated a way of thinking into our trainings at work that kind of take a metacognitive approach to how we feel. So instead of just noticing I feel anxious and frustrated, instead trying to get to the root of the problem and see where these insecurities are actually coming from. Because it's not a tree. The crystals that you saw in the thumbnail are what I'm making now. I use a method that I learned from Tabletop Witchcraft, which I will link to that video in the description. You essentially use hot glue sticks and cut them down with a straight razor or a Olfa knife, and you make those geometric angles and shapes that we see in crystals. I then take a hot glue gun and I start to pierce a hole in the bottom to give the LED a little more shine throughout the crystal. I should mention that since the glue sticks are kind of flimsy, be very careful when you're cutting them. It's pretty dangerous. Here's a small glimpse into the difference between dunking the crystals in hot water for 2 seconds versus 4 seconds. Allegedly, that hot water makes them more transparent, so that's why you dunk them in the first place. What worked for me was using my tweezers and then just dunking them into that hot cup like that. I also made little crystal clusters, which I'm really stoked about. And how I made them was cutting the glue sticks, as I showed earlier, but then taking your hot glue gun and then kind of fusing the 3 pieces by using the heat and melting them together from the bottom. To add a little extra support, you can do a little glob of glue from the top. I used 2 AA battery housings and then started poking holes into the foam. A little hastily, I might add. I'll have to patch that up. Some of the LEDs were hard to navigate through the foam, but I eventually got them to where they needed to be. And then I tested the circuit, and it worked. I then moved on to the opposite side of the canyon and started doing the same thing. I used this Drydex spackle hole filler to try and make the foam layers seamless, because I cannot yet afford ordering thick foam and shipping it to my home. But I don't know if I like it. I always have a hard time figuring out what to trim and like frame my dioramas with. One of my favorite YouTubers, Night Shift, uses a wood veneer, and I really like that, but I think it's kind of expensive and I don't know where to get it near me. If you have any recommendations, I'd love to hear what you like to use. I started adding rocks and Sculptamold to add variation to the terrain size to make it look more natural. And the next step was to make a terrain paste with a bunch of sand and dirt. One of the initial themes that I wanted to maintain on this channel was a sense of transparency and honesty, and above all else, just a kindness to myself. And I've been having a hard time doing that. I incorporate all of the mistakes and the hiccups that I encounter during projects, but I don't talk about my desire to succeed with art. And I feel like as an artist, I'm just always in flux. It's always shifting and changing and under stress, and I'm trying to understand it better. I've had a history of starting new mediums as a passion project and then trying to monetize them or see a numeric increase in views or shares or likes, or going so far as having it affect my mood when a video that I think will do really well or that I spend a lot of time on doesn't do particularly well. And this is something that I feel really embarrassed and kind of gross about, but I can't help it. It's like clockwork. And of course, this isn't an experience that's just unique to me in my life. Like, obviously, most of us in the world probably feel a certain way about this. But it's just so aggressive when you let your guard down or it kicks into overdrive. It becomes like a passion vacuum or something. I don't know. The way it kind of can manipulate how I perceive my own work or the work of others. Because as soon as and this is subjective, of course, but as soon as I shift that way of thinking into my art, it fundamentally changes the relationship I have with it. It's happened so many times with so many different things that I've gotten excited and into. I don't know if I have the answer to this, but I think thinking about it and wrestling with the idea is probably the healthiest first step in learning more about it and understanding it. Recognition that I am part of a system or a way of thinking that is pretty unhealthy is a great first step. Anyways, I really appreciate all of the support that everyone's given me, and I haven't had the healthiest relationship with that support. I think instead of trying to look forward all the time and fixating on improvement, I think something that I'll start trying to practice is a deep level of appreciation with just how far I've come already in such a short amount of time, as well as appreciation for how lucky I am that I've got a space to do all of this in. And I appreciate you being along for the ride. Here's the tree that symbolizes so much hilarity. I inserted it into the piece, and this was the big moment where I walked away for a while. But I didn't throw the whole thing in the trash, and I came back to it, and I found something that works. It just so happened that that thing that works was cutting the tree in half. I blended it in with Sculptamold, and the plan was always to have its roots kind of sticking out where the crystals are, like growing from the cliffside. And this new solution that I came up with would still allow for that, which was perfect. I added extra terrain paste to that, PVA glue for the road, and then sand on top of that. And that brings us back here. A cut down tree, a stump, but a stump and a plan. Let's get restarted. Air dry clay, or in this case Milliput, is kind of awesome because it works as a get out of jail free card sometimes. You can just start sculpting onto things, and if they adhere, you're in luck. In this case, they adhered. Once I made the stump a little more stump-like, I drilled a hole in from the top to run an LED through. For this one, I chose a red LED. Much like the other LEDs, I wired this up in parallel. I then used my airbrush and sprayed the crystals with their corresponding LED color. I then tried to figure out where I wanted the grass sections by spraying green onto the piece. And then light blue circles around each crystal, so you can kind of get the idea even without the lights on. A little pop of red for the tree stump. And then I was onto the gravel pathway. I started stippling on some brown paint, and then took some sticks from a wreath and drilled holes into the cliffside below the tree, and started inserting those roots. After tearing off the protective painter's tape, I then started inserting the crystals where they belonged. I added sticky tack glue to the piece and then started sprinkling on grass for my static grass applicator, and then used some dry leaves from Diorama Precipe. In hindsight, I probably should have waited till after I painted the grass red to add this, but you live and learn. I was finding myself not loving the stark contrast between the grass and the blue crystals. It was just a little too aggressive and popping, so I toned the grass back with some light tan. After that, I sprayed grass tufts with the same colors, and then began applying them to the piece. I then gave a zenithal highlight to our miniatures, our main characters of the scene, and then started applying those colors, those base layers, some contrast paints. I will say I think the Army Painter's Rough Iron might be my new favorite paint of all time. Initially, I applied a rust color to this, but it didn't come out well, so I went over with Evil Sun's Scarlet for the red-bearded dwarf, and I love it. I drilled into his foot, added some glue and garden wire, and inserted it into his foot, just so he would be a little more sure-footed on the battlefield. I added voluptuous pink. If you know, you know. I had some old blues laying around that I wanted to use. I also wanted to practice some highlighting techniques, and so I did that, and I enjoyed it. After these were painted up, it was time to add them to the diorama. I appreciate you watching this video. It was a lot of fun to make. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Once they were in, I just painted the sides black, and my quest was complete. Thanks for watching, and here are the final shots. Take care.